Hi, and welcome to the very first episode of the Play vs. PowerUp podcast. My name is Scott Reed, and I'm the user experience researcher at Play vs. And apparently, I also moonlight as a podcast host. Play vs. is now celebrating our 5-year anniversary of bringing esports to high schools across the country, and we're really excited to announce a brand new project. Drumroll please, this podcast. For our very first batch of episodes, we are interviewing professionals in the esports and games industry and learning more about what they do, how they got there, and hopefully demystifying all the really exciting opportunities there are for gamers after high school and college beyond just playing professionally. We hope this podcast is really helpful for high school esports players, coaches, and even parents of gamers who might be curious how to spin a passion for gaming into a lifelong career. For our very first guest, I'm excited to share my conversation with Brandy Camel. Brandy is a 14-year industry veteran, having spent the majority of her career as a community manager on titles like Grand Chase, Diablo, and Dungeons and Dragons. We talked about everything from her humble beginnings as a self-proclaimed high school games and anime nerd in rural Indiana, all the way through her current role as a producer for narrative design at the up-and-coming Firewalk Studios. For this episode, we're diving into her time as a community manager. We will learn what a community manager does, the qualities that make for a great community manager, and she has a ton of excellent advice for high schoolers and really anyone that's interested in breaking into the video games industry. So buckle up and let's hear what Brandy has to share. Take it away, Brandy.
My name's Brandy Camel. I currently live up in the Seattle area of Washington, a little bit outside in a town called Kent. And I am currently a producer for narrative design at a company called Firewalk Studios.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming on our first episode of the podcast. I understand that the Pacific Northwest is actually a great place to live if you are in the industry that you're in. Is that right?
But yeah, there's quite a few up here. I know Nintendo of America is a bit further north. Ubisoft has some offices up here. I'm trying to think of who else. There's a Pokemon companies up here. Wizards of the Coast is up here, which is where I used to work. So there's all kinds of gaming and gaming centric areas up here in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, Brandy, let's start at the very beginning. Why don't you tell everyone what you were like in high school? What were you up to? What were you interested in?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, no surprise to anybody. I was a gigantic nerd in high school. I went to high school in Brownsburg, Indiana, um, out in kind of the middle of nowhere, just outside of Indianapolis. Very small high school. I think my graduating class was a couple hundred, so on the much smaller side of things. We didn't have a movie theater in my town, like so small kind of area. A lot of my extracurricular activities were in the fine arts. I was in choir, I was in theater, I was in improv. And then I mean I played a lot of games. That was at the height of my tabletop nerdery. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with a group of friends on a regular basis. Penultimate, probably stereotypical nerd.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your college experience and what you studied and how it led to what you're doing now?
Oh yeah, it's been quite the journey, and I definitely started nowhere near where I'm at right now. So coming out of college, I graduated college in 2008 from DePaul University with a degree in screenwriting. And the college that I was in had a kind of a mixed program for digital cinema and for video gaming. So if you were in one program or the other, you did a lot of like crossover classes. So I took some classes in game design. I took some classes in philosophy for game design. And I had the option to take some programming classes. I didn't go in that direction. I did more of the like kind of cinematography oriented stuff. I did audio design, things like that that would be good crossover stuff for making video games, but not necessarily on the like programming side of things. And when I graduated, I was very interested in voiceover and in localization for games. So I took a year and a half of Japanese. It was something I was very interested in. I was very into Japanese animation, and was looking to maybe make the crossover into doing work in that area.
Sounds like in college you were really able to, explore, take lots of different kinds of classes and really just learn about the different skills involved and things that you're passionate about, like cinema, like video games. So I understand, you took some time to try and maybe figure out if working in TV and film specifically was the right fit for you.
I did that for about a year. Realized that that was not the work for me. Started looking for alternatives, and one of the things that I kind of ran into, like at the time, I was very heavily into World of Warcraft. I raided every week. I ran a raiding guild. I was main tank for my guild. So that was something that I spent a lot of time doing, and I was very active on the forums for World of Warcraft. I would do theory crafting and posting blogs and things like that, and I was just super into the community. And several of their community managers ended up just kind of learning my name over time because I was so present and visible within the community. So I started kind of building these relationships slowly, through those channels. And when BlizzCon rolled around, I managed to snag tickets to BlizzCon. A couple of my guildies came down to California to join me, and we went together to BlizzCon. And I met a couple of the community managers, so I got to know them, kind of asked them about, like, what is it you do? You talk to me about community management. Like, I like posting on forums a lot. What else do you do as a community manager? And just kind of learning about what it was that they did. So I had lots of questions about that, and I was like, that sounds pretty cool. And over time, they thought of me when it rolled around to there was hiring happening in the game master department in customer support. And John was actually the one who sent me a message saying, like, hey, have you ever thought about being a game master? Like, that's how I started. I started as a game master and became a community manager. Maybe that's something that you can do. So he shot me the notice when it went up. I applied, and I got it. And I started work about a year later after that whole meet and greet had kind of happened.
I love that. So you used your passion for World of Warcraft and for gaming and really invested in being a great digital citizen of this gaming community. You collaborated with others, you created content, and were noticed in a positive way by Blizzard. Along with some networking, you parlayed all of this into becoming a community manager. And for those who are listening and maybe have never really heard of a community manager before, what's the best way to describe the role of community manager?
So there's two ways you can kind of look at it. You can kind of look at it as PR for players in a way, but I prefer looking at it more like you are really the liaison between players and developers, because that's where you're going to be doing the majority of your work. Players often can't communicate their needs as clearly as they would like to developers, and honestly, vice versa. Developers get so lost in the weeds of their programming and working on the game for so long that they have a really hard time communicating back to their players that this is our vision and this is where we're going. And so that's kind of your job as a community manager, is to live in that space in between and translate back and forth between these two bodies that oftentimes will talk past each other. So that's at least the way that I look at it. I think that's the shortest, sweetest way.
So, why don't you walk us through what a typical day might look like for a community manager? What do they spend their days doing?
Oh, it can really vary depending on what areas of expertise that you focus on. And this is sort of where we get into, the non-standardized issues that kind of exist with community management as a role. Is that some community managers specialize in influencer management, where they're talking to streamers or YouTubers or other content creators, and they just kind of manage those relationships. A lot of the stuff that I did at Blizzard was I was more of a content manager. So a lot of my time would be spent planning, patch release cadences. Like, oh, well, we have a patch coming up. What do I need to communicate to players during this? How do we handle feedback for the PTR? How do we, I need to generate patch notes for things. I need to write up a script for a video so that people know what's new in this patch when they come back to the game. I need to write up a blog or two about what's going on, especially if there's major changes coming. So I tended to be more in that area where I was both a content creator for the company, but also just kind of planning the overall communication strategy of, this is this is what we have going on, and here's what you need to know about it. Um, there's also a lot of other things that you eventually touch as a community manager. Appearances at conventions. I did tons of work for BlizzCon every year. That was a huge chunk of my time. At Dungeons and Dragons, I helped facilitate the feedback loop for Unearthed Arcana. So as you know, as we had playtest stuff go out, I helped make sure that got visibility and made sure our designers had everything that they needed for communicating. And yeah, there's a whole lot of different things that you can touch as a community manager. And ideally, the larger the company it is, the bigger the team is. But that's not always the case. Not every company has more than one community manager. So sometimes they're stuck wearing a lot of hats.
Great. So, based on what you're saying, it sounds like it's really important as a community manager to have good writing skills, good communication skills, including public speaking, representing the company at conferences and events. Are there any other skills or qualities that you think are really important in being a successful community manager?
So something that you might not necessarily think of off the top of your head, like absolutely communications is one of the areas you should focus on the best. You need to be good and competent at writing. You need to understand at least your baseline grammar. Having editorial skills is great. But something else that you might not have visibility, especially if you touch social media at all, is understanding things like key reporting goals, KPIs, understanding what reach is, the kind of mechanics and statistics that go behind social media is such a huge part of really how you prove your worth as a community manager. A lot of the work as a community manager tends to be qualitative rather than quantitative. A lot of it is off of gut feeling and you understanding your community really well and some instinct, but you need to have that quantitative background to prop it up, to be able to prove that, yeah, like, hey, our community's upset about this thing, and here's the volume of it. Like, here's actually how many people this actually impacts. It's not just people are angry. It's 17% of our audience is upset with this. Being able to put those numbers behind what you're reporting on is so key. And I think something that a lot of folks struggle with. And I don't think it's a perfect science. Even the tools that are out there to do these kinds of things are imperfect. But learning how to utilize those, there's a lot of free ones out there that you can use even just on like your own personal social media to kind of train up on it. But that's an area that like no class is going to teach you that. That's something you're going to have to go out and kind of learn on your own.
That's really interesting to hear because I know a lot of the players in the Play Versus community actually help manage the social media accounts and websites, just kind of all the digital presence for their esports programs at their schools. So, they're volunteering to create posts. They might be drafting announcements for their school, just a lot of work to communicate what their teams are doing and really what esports is. So it sounds like there could be some community managers in training already in the Play Versus community who are just involved in their esports programs and helping managing those communities and making content. Do you have any advice for them on how they could maybe up their game and learn some valuable new skills?
Yeah. Reporting is one of the biggest things. It's a really good exercise to say like, hey, what were our top 3 most successful posts last month? And then ask yourself why. Why were those the most successful posts? What can we learn from that? What, as we're planning the next posts that we're planning on doing, what can we take as our learnings from those successful posts and apply them going forward? That's just a really good exercise in general if you're kind of cultivating the health of any channel. And definitely something I'd consider, putting forth as just like an initial exercise.
All right, Brandy has even more great advice coming up, but let's take a quick break and give a little update to the Play Versus community. Our spring season is about to start, and Logan from our customer experience team has some news for our players and coaches. Take it away, Logan.
Thanks, Scott. Hey everyone, Logan here to catch you up on all things Play Versus. First, we want to remind you that our weekly Coach Notes newsletter goes out to all coaches via email on Mondays and is always available on our website. In case you missed it this week, check out the link in the description for additional info you need to know. Now for what's new this week. The spring season is kicked off, Be sure to create and enroll your teams today to take advantage of our 2-week preseason that started this week. Google's single sign-on is now available for our PlayVS users. New users can create their accounts using their Google email address, while existing coaches and players will be able to use Google to sign into their account tied to their Google email. Note that Google's single sign-on passwords are separate from your PlayVS password. If you encounter any issues logging on, don't hesitate to reach out to the PlayVS customer experience team at support@playversus.com. For our team-based titles, you can adjust rosters as you see fit throughout the regular season. For our solo titles of Madden 23 and NBA 2K23, the roster cannot be updated after enrollment is closed. Once more this season, all Hearthstone teams will receive a Battle.net account with card packs automatically available for your players to open and use in their matches this season. The coach for the team will receive an email with the login information and further details, but be sure not to change any account information, including the Battle.net name or password, to avoid issues accessing the feature. Once enrolled, be sure to check out our game rules collection over at the PlayVS Help Center to grasp the ins and outs of the esports your students will be competing in. For a quick rundown of the changes that have been made this season, check out our rule changes summary article in the description. Lastly, the Smart Scheduler returns with a few improvements to maintain our high match completion percentages from the fall. If this is your first time competing with us, we strongly suggest reviewing the Smart Scheduler overview article in the description for a full rundown of how matches will be scheduled this season. That's all for now. We're looking forward to seeing you compete in the best spring season yet. Back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Logan. I am super excited about the spring season and can't wait to see which teams are going to bring home trophies for their schools. All right, let's get back to my conversation with Brandy about community management. Another thing that you said that I thought was really interesting was that you essentially started out as a player of World of Warcraft. You were really passionate about it. You were involved in the online community. You ended up being noticed by Blizzard and ultimately hired as a community manager. What advice would you have for gamers who might want to be more involved in the communities around their games? Maybe they eventually like to be hired by some of these companies, or maybe they just have a really great idea for how a game might be improved. What advice do you have for them as they are communicating online, whether it be contacting the company directly or making content, engaging on social media? And the reason I ask is because I know it's really important for a lot of educators who might be listening and parents to instill the qualities of digital citizenship with their students. It's part of the Common Core state standards to produce and publish writing, to link and cite sources, and in general, just interact and collaborate with others in a positive way online. In your experience, how should gamers be conducting themselves online if they are interested in being a bigger part of the community or eventually being hired by the community?
I would say if there were two things that I would tell people in terms of acting that one, first of all, never forget that the person that you're talking to is actually a person on the other side of the screen. That is like first and foremost. If it would not come out of your mouth in a face-to-face interaction, don't put it online because it's not going to serve you there. It's not going to help you put on a professional face. It's not going to help you get noticed in a positive way in that kind of environment. So that's like first and foremost. It's just it's that whole if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. But the second part is learn the art of constructive criticism. It's absolutely okay to say, "Hey, I don't like this." It is not okay to say, "Hey, I don't like this and I hate your face for it." Like those are two huge different disparities. And I know it's so easy. It is so easy when it's a game that you really, really love or you're really, really passionate about and you get riled up because it's just not working the way that you want it to. But it's a game, nobody's gonna live or die over if your class hasn't been buffed in the last few weeks. It's not a life or death situation. Take a step back and realize that, like, okay, what is it that I actually want to communicate? Why don't I like this thing? Why does it make me feel bad? And try to make that part of your communication. Don't just say, hey, I don't like this. Say, hey, I don't like this because. Always make sure that you give that why behind things, because then you're actually having a conversation. And that's really what people in the industry are looking for, is seeing whether or not you're thinking critically about the things that you're talking about. And that's how you show that you're thinking critically, is like, oh, well, I've actually put a lot of thought into the why of this, or I've pulled some numbers and this is what I've seen. I might not have dev tools, but this is what I see as a player. Am I on point here? Having those kinds of discussions, and also being willing to accept that there are some things that developers are going to know that you don't, and that's okay too. But be open to the idea that, if you're genuine in your inquiries, they're probably going to want to share some of those things with you to really help you understand, well, this is why we do the things that we do.
Yes, yes, yes. That is such a good point. And I can definitely relate to that. Just at Play Versus, I'm a researcher there. We do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of interview sessions with users. And really, there's a lot of opportunities for players and coaches to provide feedback and recommend features and whatnot. And the things that really do get noticed and shared with the company are the types of feedback that you're mentioning that are really detail-oriented, that are clear, that are constructive. And when we can tell that there was someone who really put some thought into this and they're really invested in the community, in the product, in the game, that's the stuff that really pops out to us and that we want to engage with further, and actually sometimes even invite them to be even more involved in our development process, whether that be testing a prototype of a new feature or speaking directly with our designers or our product managers. Are there any misconceptions about working in the video game industry? Any myths that you want to bust while you have an audience here?
There's plenty. I feel like we're still kind of fighting that misconception that working in the gaming industry is playing video games all day, and that is like the furthest from the truth. We actually struggle to do our weekly play tests because people are so busy actually making the game to sit down and play the game. So it's that is obviously, yes, it's necessary for you to sit down and play your game and get that feedback and get that input, especially from a variety of different perspectives, to polish and hone and get that done. But that is such a small part of what you do on your day-to-day basis. And it can be fun, but it is still very hard work. It is still a job. And that can also at times wear on you over time. I think most of the people I know in the industry don't play the games that they work on in their spare time because they've been looking at it all day. And sometimes when you're done with your job, the last thing that you want to do is go home and feel like you're doing more of it by sitting in front of your computer and playing the same thing that you've been staring at all day. So it doesn't mean you don't have a love for it or that you don't enjoy what you do, but it is really important to keep that work home balance, in check, to make sure, because it helps prevent burnout. And that is just such a huge, very easy thing to do when you're working in an industry that is so driven on passion.
Yeah, it sounds like you need to have a passion for gaming and be knowledgeable about games, but also have a general curiosity about games and different kinds of genres, and some interest in how games are made. And that's kind of the connecting dot between being a really great player and being involved in the industry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And honestly, the more spread your knowledge is, the better. If say you're a really good League of Legends player, cool, that limits where you could go with that. You only really are carving out knowledge in League of Legends. Maybe explore some other MOBAs and understand, why do they do things differently than the way League does? What does Smite do differently that makes it work better? What does Dota do differently? Those are the kinds of questions that you should be asking, and you should spread your knowledge. You can be an expert in a genre, or you could be an expert in even just like in a theme. Like, I really like horror games, so I play all kinds of stuff from 7 Days to Die to Diablo to Left 4 Dead, and all of those things really appeal to me. But they're all completely different genres. They all play very differently. So and it's allowed me to have a breadth of knowledge, not only in the way things are made, but it helps me do my job better, because I can say, oh, well, what does this game do narratively really well, that I can take to my team and say, hey, how can we learn from this? And that is just also a really great transferable skill that'll be useful no matter where you end up.
Okay, Brandy, I think next week we're really going to dive into your work as a producer for narrative design. But just to kind of wrap things up this week in our discussion about community management, any last words of wisdom before we sign off here?
Oh gosh, I think if I had like one message just to give to other kids who are looking at like, hey, I want to be in this industry or I really want to try to do this thing, I'd say first and foremost, don't be shy about any of your passions. You know, I've said a few times here, like, yeah, I was a stereotypical nerd or I was super geeky into this thing. And it's like, you know, don't be shy about that. You know, I came out of a generation where that was very heavily picked on upon and you know that was kind of a source of area for being bullied, and we're now in a generation where you know being a geek's kind of cool, and that's awesome. I wish I had that. You know, enjoy that, be proud of that, be supportive of that, especially you know even if it's a passion or a hobby that you don't understand, maybe give it a shot. You know, people are passionate about some of the strangest things maybe to you, but there's a reason behind why they love it so much, and don't be afraid to at least try to find out what that reason is.
I love that advice. Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity after high school to explore these passions and make it an actual career. So, you know, why hide while you're in high school instead of embracing it and learning as much as you can and just diving in a little bit deeper?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brandy. This has been such a fun conversation. I know I've learned a lot about what a community manager does, and I can't wait for next week. We're going to share a little bit more about your story and how you became a producer for narrative design. We'll also talk with Peter Drummond, who's the lead writer on Revita, and he'll share some of his experience as well being a writer on a video game. So thanks again. This has been great.
Well, thank you again so much for having me. This was a blast, and it's just a wonderful opportunity.
And thank you to our listeners. Hope you enjoyed our very first episode of the Play vs. PowerUp podcast. In our episode notes, you can find links and additional information about some of the topics we discussed today, as well as details on all the news for the Play vs. community that Logan mentioned. If your school isn't already competing with Play vs., get in touch. Go to playversus.com, that's playvs.com, to learn more about our leagues and platform and get connected to a team member over here who can help you and your school get started. All right, that's it. Signing off, and till next time. Bye.